Hello, this is Ben with the DIY Homefront, and today I'm playing the electrician. We had a microwave that went bad, and it used to go right here. And for some reason we decided we were going to put one that goes above the stove, which means today I'll be taking this out and we'll be putting this in. That's if everything goes well. The first thing I'm going to do is open it up and get the directions out and read it. Crazy as that might seem, that's what I'm doing. But anyway, let's get into this. Looks like I'm probably going to need to be careful with the box because it looks like the box has a template on it that I might need. Well, the box was pretty sturdy and had some large metal staples in the top and plenty of styrofoam, making sure that everything was secure. I like the fact that it had the styrofoam on the corners to make sure if the box got boogered up, that the microwave on the inside would be undamaged. It's got some dotted lines on the bottom of the box, designed to show you where to cut it to open it up without damaging anything. And this is a pretty heavy microwave. I had my wife help me out a little bit when I needed to move it around. And now I'm going to read this. So I read all the directions and I'm a little disappointed in myself for not thinking this through before I started. I made these kitchen cabinets and I made them to fit exactly where they are, and I made the most of the space. So this cabinet goes all the way up to the ceiling and it's a little low. And if I were to hang that microwave off of it, the microwave hangs down 17 inches from the cabinet. I don't know if you can see it, but that's where the bottom of the microwave is going to be, and that won't work. And this is not the look of defeat. This is the look of this is going to be a lot more work than I had originally planned. Such is Murphy's Law. So the first step might be me rebuilding this kitchen cabinet that it's supposed to attach to. I'll have to give it like about an hour to think about that before I go to the next step. But I'm pretty sure this cabinet's getting rebuilt. All right, I've had a talk with the missus, and the decision is that we're going to take this cabinet down and we are going to rework it, and we're going to make it shorter, about that much shorter. And that's what's going to be required so that we can get that microwave to go up underneath it. After looking at the directions again, I determined where the bottom of the cabinet should be and put a mark on the cabinet. So that's how much I'm going to have to take off. I'm going to start by taking the doors off, and I'll put those off to the side because they're going to have to be shortened, and that's probably going to be a video all in itself. Now that the doors are off, I'll go ahead and finish taking the hinges off. I'll put those in a plastic bag and keep them on the shelf so I have them when it's time to put the doors back on. There's multiple holes where the hinges were attached to the door, so I'm going to put a mark on the correct holes for the hinge. That'll be important when I want to try to shorten these doors to put them back up. I also marked the top of the doors too. I believe I made these cabinets in 2008, so they've been up there for quite a while. So I'm going to also go ahead and take the time to clean everything up as long as I'm taking it apart. I'll need to remove the grease grate so I can access the 4 screws that hold this exhaust fan up. You don't have to take the screws all the way out right now. You can just loosen them and then you can pull the exhaust fan forward and it should come off of that upper cabinet. Of course, before you pull it all the way off the cabinet, you need to make sure you disconnect the electricity going to the exhaust fan. Normally it's done in one of two ways. You have an outlet that is plugged into, or it will be hardwired to an electrical box. My exhaust fan is hardwired to the house's electrical system, and the connection is behind this cover. Those red things are called wire nuts, and they connect the wiring for the exhaust fan to the house. Now make sure that the power is disconnected if it's hardwired. I just turn the exhaust fan on and then start clicking circuit breakers until it goes off. It's now safe to remove the wire nuts. It's also possible you might have a grounding wire that's been screwed to the cabinet someplace. You'll also need to disconnect that. I just chose to take a pair of wire cutters and cut all the wires and not reuse the wire nuts. Alright, we should be able to just slide this forward and drop it down from the screws and pull it right on out. Looks like I had to sort of feed those electrical wires through the back of the housing for the exhaust fan. Well, here you can see I've got two electrical boxes behind that exhaust fan. One with some outlets and one with just hot wires. My under counter lights are plugged into the outlet, and that's controlled by a light switch mounted on the wall. And just to be safe, I'll go ahead and put some wire nuts on these other wires. Now I'll go ahead and finish taking out those 4 screws that held the exhaust fan in place. I'll go ahead and use a pair of pliers to pull out the hangers that kept the wires attached to the bottom of the upper cabinet. There's really not a whole lot that keeps this cabinet attached to the wall. There's a couple screws on each side that screw the cabinets together, and then there's 4 screws along the top that secure the cabinet to the wall. Because I've got some decorative trim at the top, the cabinet stayed in place after all the screws were out, and now I can pull it carefully forward off the wall. You don't want to damage your stove, so if you have room, you might want to move the stove out of the way so nothing gets dropped on it when you're doing this work above it. Now I need to examine this and figure out how I'm going to possibly cut the bottom off without destroying the cabinet, because I don't want to have to make another one. It's really going to be a challenge to keep these 3 pieces of wood looking like they join each other after the cabinet's been modified. The modifications will start by me marking each side of the cabinet with where I need to cut to remove the bottom of the cabinet. At least it should, even though you may not have grown up that way. And I'll mark down 3/4 of an inch for how long that front piece should be. Obviously, I have to do this to both sides of the cabinet. The back of the cabinet gets measured and should be marked 3/4 of an inch higher than the sides, and that will allow for the plywood that makes up the bottom of the cabinet. Alright, I have moved this project to the workshop or the driveway depending on your point of view, and I've put a piece of carpet down, and I've got the cabinet sitting on the carpet so it can't get damaged. So I'm using a 7 1/4 inch DeWalt battery operated saw, and it's relatively new. And that's important because there's not much slop in it, and it really cuts the line without wobbling around at all. And I'm going to plunge cut this, which means I'm going to just hold it and then push it down onto where I need it to cut. And I will do this with the saw blade set up to cut a very shallow depth. And now I will adjust it so that the blade is as deep as it can go. I'll go all the way across the back to the other side and stop just short of the outside edge of the cabinet. The bottom of the cabinet will come flush to this cut, so it'll be okay if I go a little bit past it. And here on the other side, you can see exactly what I mean. I'm right up to the outside edge of the cabinet. Now I've got the cabinet on its side, and I'm going to start from the back and cut towards the front. But shortly into this cut, I realize that the wood is fraying. So I'm going to do a trick that should help keep the wood from fraying, and that is to put tape on it. This is just regular old masking tape or painter's tape, and you'll want to put it down securely and make sure it sticks well to the wood. The only bad part is you have to go back and remark the wood where it needs to be cut. Well, hopefully we have better results, and we will cut right up to the edge of that trim piece. And now we can pull off the tape and see if we ended up with a nice clean line. And we did. We'll have to do the same technique to the other side. Now I'll cut the trim piece that's on the front of the cabinet and make sure that it's 3/4 of an inch lower to accommodate the piece of wood that becomes the bottom. Every time you make a cut, the cabinet loses some of its structural integrity. So I was very careful when I turned this from one side to the other. Now that I've got these cuts done with the skill saw, the only piece that's really holding the top and the bottom together is that front fascia board, the little trim piece. So I'm going to take a chisel and gently chip away at that to separate the two, trying not to damage any of the wood in the process. It took a long time with this chisel to get both sides, but eventually I got it. But I just wanted to tell you, we're almost 10 minutes into this video, and if you're still here, that's a pretty impressive feat all by itself. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoy my channel. The whole purpose of this is just to show you what I do around the house. All right, after about 10 minutes, it looks like we have finally got both sides separated. We still have to do some work on the bottom and then glue the two pieces together. After looking everything over, there was still a little bit of cleanup left to do where I had chiseled these two pieces apart. But wow, everything is looking really good. So now it's on to the bottom of the cabinet, and the first thing to do is to get off the trim pieces that go around the border. We will recycle and use the bottom shelf of this cabinet, so we need to knock off the two pieces that used to be the sides. I don't know if we could do this with store-bought cabinets. I made these out of 3/4 inch birch plywood, so the wood is actually sturdy and strong and has substance. I don't know if it was made out of particle board, you could do the same thing. I'll use my grinder with a cutoff wheel and remove any of the nails that used to hold this together, and just generally clean everything up before we start to glue. I'll use my orbital sander with 220 grit sandpaper on it, and I can use that to clean things up and knock off any old glue or wood that's on the gluing surfaces. I don't have to be extremely careful because the majority of this cabinet you're not going to be able to see anyway. It's going to be too high and too far back, and then the bottom's going to be covered with that microwave. Well, I've got my large Porter cable nail gun out, and I'm just going to test a couple nails to make sure they go through the wood like I want. And I've probably got a little bit over 1/2 inch coming through. So I test fitted the bottom on the cabinet, and it fit like I wanted it to. So now I'm going to glue it into place. On a lot of my woodworking projects, I end up using a polyurethane Gorilla Glue that you have to wet both sides, and it ends up sort of bubbling up and expanding. But you have to sand that off, and I don't want to sand this cabinet once it's finished because I'd have a difficult time trying to match up the color tone or to hide it. So I'm going to use a more traditional glue, and I'll use a bunch of it, and I can go back after I've got it fit together with a wet rag and wipe off any excess. I could clamp this together, but if I did that, I would be waiting for the glue to dry. So I'm going to go ahead and nail the bottom on. And that means the glue will keep drying, but it'll have enough structural integrity that I can work with the piece while that's happening. I'll put a nail about every 2 to 3 inches apart until I've made it all the way around. And when I say all the way around, that means I put nails in each end of the cabinet too. When it came time to put the trim back on each end, I made sure my nails were long enough to go through the trim and into the wood of the cabinet. A little more glue and some nails, and both of the end pieces of trim will be back on the cabinet. And I can go ahead and move it around if I feel like it. So I have 2 nail guns, a smaller one that's a finisher and this one. They're both made by Porter Cable, and I both got them in 2007. The larger gun, I've had to replace the internal pieces because the plastic shattered. But other than that, they've worked extremely well for me. Well, now that the cabinet is nailed together, I can move it around. And I'll go ahead and double check and make sure I've got all the glue off the inside and outside of the cabinet. Like I said, I can go ahead and start moving this cabinet around right away because the nails are going to hold it together while the glue's dry. And it's not necessarily a one-man job, but I'm a one-man show. I probably would have had a more difficult time if the top of this cabinet didn't have those trim pieces that would hold it up. And all I'm really going to have to do is just slide this back into place and re-screw the original screws that held the cabinet to the wall. Because most of the cabinet screws that hold cabinets to the wall are at the very top, where there would be the most force trying to pull the cabinet away from the wall. I'm not sure why I'm checking this now, because if I didn't cut the cabinet right, it's a little bit late. Wow, I did not mean for this video to be quite this long, but I'm sure somebody's going to be like me, and they're going to bring something home and then realize, crap, it's not going to fit there. Well, that's how I solved my problem with the cabinet being too small. And now we're going to get back to what is really the easy job, which is putting in a new microwave. Thanks for watching. I hope I'm giving you enough detail for you to get what you want done. And I hope you like and subscribe because I've got a lot of content out there that's very similar to this. all how-to-dos, so to speak. Well, what I've been doing is cutting the template out that was part of the box that the microwave came in. A lot of products have a template inside of them that's usually like on a piece of paper. I was very fortunate this one was on the outside and made out of cardboard and was sturdy and would hold itself up so I could mark things. I'm going to mark the center of the space where the microwave goes because I need to put a bracket up that'll help mount it. I'm taking some of these measurements off of the template and putting them on the wall instead of using the template itself. But this will be how far down the bracket will be. So here's the template placed up against the wall where it's supposed to be. And I'm going to go ahead and mark some of the spots where the screws will go to hold it to the wall. You'll need to know where the studs are that are in your wall because you want to make sure that this template is screwed to solid wood behind the drywall. I know I've got at least one stud that goes between those two junction boxes. And I like to go back and take the tip of a Phillips head screwdriver and tap it onto the wall where I put my pencil marks. It's a lot easier to drill holes or start screws in the right spot that way. I'm going to go ahead and pre-drill the template where the mounting hardware should be. It's just going to make it easier for me to do this by myself. I've got a wooden spacer that I'm going to put on the back wall, and then I'm going to flush my template up to it. And the reason why I need a gap behind the microwave is because I need a space for the electrical wires for the lights and for the microwave itself to be. I don't want any part of the metal frame of the microwave pinching any electrical wires. I'll go ahead and remove the template and finish drilling out the two holes before I swap to a larger drill bit. This drill bit is going to be just a little bit larger than the screws used to hold the microwave up. I'll drill the final hole for these two mounting screws from the top of the cabinet down. That way I don't have to worry about any of the wood dust falling on my face or in my eyes. And this is what the hardware looks like. Well, I used a spacer at the top of the cabinet when drilling the holes for the mounting hardware. I'm going to do the same thing at the bottom, and I'll put a line on the bottom of this mounting bracket. So that way when I put the spacer there, I can put the spacer up to that line and then the metal bracket on top of that. It'll make sense later on. Now let's move on to the electrical connection. A lot of exhaust vents that go above the stove actually have an outlet for power, just like I've got the outlet right there on the wall that I've got my lights running to. Now the old exhaust fan was hardwired, but the new microwave has a power cord with a plug on the end. So I'm going to convert this hardwired connection into a plug for the microwave. I'll accomplish this by straightening out the wires, measuring the wires, cutting them and stripping them to the correct length. And then I can push the base of the plug into the conduit box and attach the wires to the female receptacle that the power cord on the microwave will plug into. After connecting the hot wire, the neutral, and the ground, I can take the back half of the plug and screw it in. And I'll tuck this all into the electrical box until the microwave is ready to be hooked up to power. If you want to be a successful DIYer, then you have to be able to adjust things on the fly. Earlier I had put some marks where I needed to drill holes in to attach the bracket to the wall, but then I realized if I did that, the electrical wires would be in the way. So I decided to put a spacer in there. Well, that means the spacer is going to cover up the holes that I put on the wall that I had marked. So I used a screw put in the center of the wooden spacer and attached it to the wall where the bracket would have been. That means I can put the bracket on top of that wooden spacer to put new marks to drill into the wall. I'll drill these holes just a little bit bigger than the screws that I'm going to use. And I'm drilling them out because I want the screws to grab a hold of the stud behind this spacer. So I have 3 screws that hold this bracket to the wall. The one on the left and the one in the center actually hit a stud, but the one on the right does not. So I'm going to have to use a special type of screw that fans out once it's in the wall to attach it, which means drilling a much bigger hole for that device to fit into. Here's the right side of the bracket, and I've got a screw through it and into the wood. And now what I'm doing is I'm putting on that special piece that's going to fan out once it gets into the wall. God, I wish I held that a little higher so you could see it better. Well, here it is going into the hole in the wall. And once it's in there, that spring fans back out. And it's going to grab that sheetrock and make a solid connection. Well, here's the other two screws. And I will get these started by hand. And then I'll get my impact driver out. And I'll tighten these all the way down. And then we can finally check with the level to see if we did a good job or not. Looks like we're spot on. Wow, all of a sudden this project just seemed like it's done. So with that bottom bracket in place, the microwave gets lifted up and set on two tabs, and then there's two screws that will come down from the top cabinet and screw into the top. Now all this is a lot easier said than done, and this is one time that I could not have done this without my wife. I could hold it up, but I probably couldn't move it around or adjust it. And just a little help that she provided, or maybe I should say the lot of help that she provided, made all the difference. And once the bottom's hooked onto those two tabs, it's pretty much going to hold itself up. Then comes the epiphany moment of, how are we going to get this plugged in? Because the plug is behind it. I believe in new home construction, you would end up having an outlet or receptacle in the cabinet above the stove. And what you would do is you would drill a hole straight up through that cabinet. And you would run the cord straight up, and then you would plug it into that receptacle. But we don't have that. So what I'm doing is I'm reaching back and looking for the plug that's in that junction box. And I've got it plugged in, and then it just gets pushed up. And this is probably where my design for the other cabinet actually was to my advantage, because it's got that detail around the edge, that trim molding. And that trim molding is going to leave me enough space for that power cord just to rest on top of the microwave. I'll make sure the mounting screws don't rub against it or pinch it, but that will solve the problem with the power cord. Like I said, there's two screws that go straight down from that upper cabinet and screw into the microwave. And once those are tightened, the microwave is permanently in place. The only thing left to do is to take the wrapper off, be impressed, and turn it on and give it a try. I wish you guys could have seen my face. It didn't work. So I figured I probably didn't get it plugged in very well. So two screws from the top undone, lift it off and set it on top of the stove. And sure enough, it's not plugged in. So plug it in, lift it back up, tighten two screws, and then it's attached to the wall, and now we have power. Look at the little green light flashing on the microwave. So like I said, admire my work. Well, this completes another video and my attempt to problem solve a cabinet that was too big. Hopefully it gave you some ideas if you have similar problems. And you can see we still have another video to do sooner or later where we fix the cabinet doors. Well, until then, like, subscribe, check out my playlist, and I'll see you in another video.